Ladies and gentlemen, in keeping with the theme for today, the organizers are going green. We hope that you can register your participation via the QR code on the table. The program and details of the forum are also accessible online. The QR code is on your table in green. Drinking water is also available from the dispenser on the right-hand side of the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, as the event will begin shortly, we invite everyone to take your seats. To ensure the smooth running of the event, we would also appreciate for all mobile phones to be put on silent mode. We would also like to remind everyone to adhere to the health SOPs throughout the event. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On your respective tables, there are two QR codes. The first QR code on your top will lead you to the registration site. The QR code at the bottom is available to access the events program. As the event will begin shortly, we invite everyone to take your seats. To ensure the smooth running of the event, we will appreciate for all mobile phones to be put on silent mode. We would also like to remind everyone to adhere to the health SOPs throughout the event. Ladies and gentlemen, in keeping with the theme for today, the organizers are going green. We hope that you can register your participation via the QR code on your table. The program and details of the forum are also accessible online. The QR code on your table is colored green for registration. Drinking water is also available from the dispenser at the sides of the hall. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on your respective tables, there are two QR codes. The first QR code on the top will lead you to the registration site. The QR code at the bottom is available to access today's program. As the event will begin shortly, we invite everyone to take your seats. To ensure the smooth running of the event, we would appreciate for all mobile phones to be put on silent mode. We would also like to remind everyone to adhere to the health SOPs throughout the event. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. In keeping with the theme for today, the organizers are going green. Please register your participation via the QR code on your table. The program and details of the forum are also accessible online. The QR code on your table is green in color. Drinking water are also available at the sides of the hall. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the event will begin shortly, and we recognize the presence of His Excellency Datuk Cheong Lun Lai, Deputy Secretary General of Multilateral Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, His Excellency Tan Sri Othman Hashim, Chairman of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, Her Excellency Karima Al Khoury, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, and Mr. Abdulaziz Muhammad Jodi, Deputy Director General of the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please rise for the national anthem, Negaraku. Thank you. Kindly take your seats. His Excellency Datuk Cheong Lun Lai, Deputy Secretary General of Multilateral Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, His Excellency Tan Sri Othman Hashim, Chairman of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, Her Excellency Karima Al Khoury, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, Mr. Abdul Aziz Muhammad Johdi, Deputy Director General of the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, Her Excellency Tan Sri Professor Dr. Jamila Mahmud, Executive Director, Sunway Center for Planetary Health, distinguished panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum, Salam Sejahtera, and a very good morning. Selamat datang and welcome to the Human Rights Day 2021 celebration. Today we join the international community in celebrating Human Rights Day, observed every year on 10th of December since 1950. And we are indeed delighted that you are here today with us this morning, either physically or virtually. This year, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, and United Nations in Malaysia are pleased to once again jointly organize the Human Rights Day Forum with the theme Access to Safe, Clean, Healthy, and Sustainable Environment as a Human Right. Malaysia's priority in addressing climate change is part of the country's pledges for its membership of the Human Rights Council for the term 2022-2024. It is also in line with the 12th Malaysia Plan 2021-2025 towards a prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable growth for all. To celebrate this positive development, the forum will focus on the impact of environmental degradation and climate change on the enjoyment of human rights, as well as to explore sustainable environmental solutions. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to begin the program this morning, I have the honor to invite His Excellency Tan Sri Othman Hashim, Chairman of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, or more fondly known as SUHAKAM, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Terima kasih mengurusi majlis. Yang berhormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Minister of Foreign Affairs Malaysia. Yang berhormat Datuk Sri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Parliament and Law, Your Excellency Ms. Karima El Khoury, UN Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei Darussalam, Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Jamilah Mahmud, Executive Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health, Pro-Chancellor of Heriot Ward, University Malaysia, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, or SUHAKAM, I am pleased to welcome everyone to the Human Rights Day Forum 2021. Human Rights Day is observed every year on 10 December to commemorate the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, one of the great accomplishments in the history of human rights. I must say that the theme for today's celebration is very significant, timely, and is close to our hearts. Access to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human rights. On 8 October 2021, in a landmark move, the United Nations Human Rights Council, for the first time, recognized that having a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a fundamental human rights by passing the resolutions number 48/13 at the 48 sessions. It called on states to act aggressively and promptly towards implementing these recognized rights. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights and the environment are intrinsically intertwined. A clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is essential in the enjoyment of our human rights, whilst polluted, hazardous, and unhealthy environments interfere and potentially violate our human rights. According to the World Health Organization's WHO analysis in 2016, nearly 1/4 of all global deaths, roughly 13.7 million deaths a year, are linked to the environment due to risks such as air pollution and chemical exposures. The advancements of today's technology threatens the destructions of the environment due to the need to temper environmental goals with the realities of industrial life. The effects of this unsustainable management of natural resources may then potentially affect the enjoyment of basic human rights. Environmental impacts such as climate change tends to worsen existing disparities in the fulfillment of these basic rights. And because of its long-term and irreversible impacts, also disproportionately affects rights of the poor and marginalized communities, including indigenous people, women, and children. Around the world, many countries have recognized their citizens' rights to a healthy environment as a human right. Today, more than 3/4 of the world's national constitutions include explicit references or provisions focusing on protections of the environment in their constitutions. To name a few, constitutions of Switzerland, Greece, and Norway. In Malaysia, our federal constitutions, as the supreme law of the land, does not clearly state the obligations to protect the environment, but it is implicit in Article 5, which guarantees the rights to life. It is time for Malaysia to enshrine the rights to a clean and sustainable environment in its constitution for the protections of both present and future generations to a safe, clean, and healthy habitat. I wish to take this opportunity to highlight opinions expressed by our former and current Chief Justice on the need to protect a clean environment. In his speech at the opening of the legal year 2017, former Chief Justice Yang Ahmad Arif Tun Arifin bin Zakaria expressed his opinion in favor of amending the federal constitutions to expressly include a right to clean and healthy environment. Yang Ahmad Arif Tun Datuk Sri Zaki Tun Azmi quoted the 1996 judgment in the case of Tan Teck Seng versus Suruhanjaya Perkhidmatan Pendidikan, saying that the expressions of life in Article 5 incorporates all those facets that are an integral part of life itself, and those matters which go to form the quality of life, which inarguably includes a clean and healthy environment. Meanwhile, the current Justice of Malaysia, Yang Ahmad Arif Tun Tengku Maimun binti Tuan Mat, during the welcoming address at the SUHAKAM training workshops held on 2nd December 2022, also made reference to the Tan Teck Seng case and further stated that life encompasses all of its various aspects, including the right to a clean environment. The phrase clean environment is often confined to meaning water, air, soil, and food. It is perhaps time to reassess the rights by considering whether it further includes the rights to a reasonably free disease environment, especially in light of COVID-19. SUHAKAM had organized the Forum on Rights to Clean Water on 5th April 2021, following the recurring water pollutions in certain parts of the country which had negatively impacted access to clean water. And recently, SUHAKAM also organized stakeholder consultations in collaborations with the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism, C4 Center, with the aim to address the plastic waste imports in Malaysia. In the conversations, SUHAKAM noted that there is no lack of legislations on environmental laws in Malaysia. There are sufficient numbers of laws, both primary and subsidiary legislations, with severe penalties. However, major issues revolve on operators and irresponsible parties not complying fully with the laws and weaknesses in enforcement by the authorities. Federal and state authorities should ensure the effective enforcement of their environmental standards against public and private actors. Every citizen needs a clean and healthy environment because the state of health of the people does not depend on the number of doctors and hospitals only, but equally important is the pristine environment. To successfully safeguard and protect the environment, all stakeholders need to cooperate in undertaking environmental management efforts at both national and international levels. The government has pledged its commitment to intensify efforts to promote a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable development, and improve its understanding on the effects of climate change on the enjoyment of human rights. It was clearly spelled out in Malaysia's voluntary pledges for its candidature to the United Nations Human Rights Council for the term 2022 to 2024. It is highly commendable, and SUHAKAM hopes that the pledges, as well as other commitments made, would be translated into concrete actions for genuine improvement and enjoyment of human rights in people's lives and environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving to the end of 2021, a year full of challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic has curtailed a wide range of basic human rights and has caused catastrophic loss of lives and devastated the economies around the world. Human Rights Day is an opportunity to reaffirm the importance of human rights in rebuilding the world we want. With global solidarity and interconnectedness and shared humanity. Before I conclude, I would like to mention Victor Hugo's famous remark, "You can resist an invading army. You cannot resist an idea whose time has come." The interdependence of human rights and the environment is an idea whose time is here. Finally, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Legal Affairs Divisions of the Prime Minister's Department, the UN country team, and of course, the team from SUHAKAM for their great contributions in organizing this important forum in conjunction with the Human Rights Day. I also wish to express my deepest appreciations to all the speakers and participants for taking part in this forum. Thank you very much, everyone, and wish you all a productive and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to invite Her Excellency Korima Al Khoury, the United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, to deliver her opening address for Human Rights Day 2021.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yang Berhormat Datuk Sri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office for Parliament and Law, Yang Datuk Sri Azalina Othman Said, Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on Law and Human Rights, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Othman Hashim, Chairman of SUHAKAM, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Jamila Mahmood, Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health, esteemed panel of speakers, representatives of the Diplomatic Corps, colleagues in the Malaysia UN country team, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, salam sejatra. On behalf of the United Nations country team and our partners in government and SUHAKAM, I warmly welcome you to our joint commemoration of the Human Rights Day. Please allow me first to commend Malaysia's efforts to bring human rights to the fore, to keep the conversation going on the human rights challenges at home, and to engage internationally to speak up for the billions of people whose fundamental rights are violated every day. Congratulations to Malaysia on its election to the Human Rights Council, and as importantly, congratulations on the pledges and level of commitment to action. Action for a dignified life, for freedom, justice, and peace. Today, the world is celebrating human rights under the theme of reducing inequalities and advancing human rights, reasserting the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. The world did not need a pandemic to remind us how unequally peoples and people are treated, how the most vulnerable amongst us must not be left behind. And yet, COVID-19 continues to test our ability to safeguard life. And the global community is failing to protect the prerequisite for the enjoyment of all other human rights, the right to life. In the spirit of advancing human rights, while we face unprecedented crises, and when climate change threatens the very existence of humanity, our forum today will address the theme of access to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right. The UN Human Rights Council Resolution 48/13 was adopted just weeks before COP26. This breakthrough resolution is the fruit of a battle fought for decades by environment activists and rights defenders, which finally moved the international community to declare a new universal right. It calls on states to act collectively and national and international partners to work collectively. It sets some actions for states to adopt appropriate policies to ensure the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. On the same day, the Human Rights Council also adopted Resolution 48/14, appointing a special rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change. Distinguished audience, 90% of human beings are breathing polluted air. Air pollution, primarily the result of burning fossil fuel, which also drives climate change, causes 13 deaths per minute worldwide. WHO estimates that 1 in 4 deaths globally are linked to the environment. Millions of children worldwide are severely impacted by the devastating consequences of the environmental crisis. 1.7 million of them die every year from inhaling contaminated air or drinking polluted water. The calls for systemic, profound, and rapid changes is important, and it's for now. While non-legally binding, the resolution contains strong political commitments and is undeniably a tool to improve the lives of billions of people. Clean air, clean water, life in a more just and sustainable world. 197 countries and 120 world leaders have just come out of COP26, fully aware of the real and existential threat of the climate emergency and the criticality of bold action now. The call for behavioral, regulatory, policy and financing changes was loud and clear and should not be heard by governments alone, but also by the private sector, civil society, communities, and all of us living on planet Earth. As we embark on this bumpy ride to a more sustainable future, putting human rights at the center of climate action, of conservation, of addressing pollution, and of preventing future pandemics is a moral duty. Life-changing improvement requires that we address environment crises in a more coordinated, effective, and non-discriminatory manner. That we all deliver on the promise to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and that we provide stronger protection of rights, especially of those most impacted. What does this mean for Malaysia? As it works to translate its vision for a prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable future, Malaysia will need to review, reform, and upgrade certain legislation and standards at the national level. Ensuring clean air, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, thriving ecosystems and biodiversity, and a toxic-free environment will require behavioral change, but also structural change. Protecting rights and delivering on the commitments of Resolution 48/13 is intrinsically linked to ensuring access to information, to the guarantee of non-discrimination, to access to justice, to participation in policy making, and to transparency and accountability. There is no doubt that the triple planetary threats of climate change, pollution, and nature loss is by far the greatest human rights challenge of our times. Millions face the real risk of losing their homes and being displaced, falling into extreme poverty and becoming ill. But Malaysia has the means and will to prevent such a catastrophic scenario. So allow me to share some thoughts. First, climate action and its human rights implications should be part of every department's jurisdiction and work plan to build forward better and recover from the pandemic. We encourage all ministries, but also states and local governments, to anchor their action in the values and commitments upheld in the 12th Malaysia Plan, the Foreign Policy Framework, the 2021 Voluntary National Review, the Human Rights Action Plan, and other guiding frameworks and international standards. Second, understand, explore, and capitalize on interlinkages and synergies. Climate change action is inextricably linked to human rights and leaving no one behind are at the core of the decade of action to achieve the SDGs. An integrated approach will yield progress on many fronts. This goes hand in hand with institutional coherence and coordination. Third, and building on the very promising practice championed by YB Dato Saifuddin, enhance multi-stakeholder engagement to make sure that delivering on Resolution 4813 and other human rights, treaties and obligations is everyone's business. This would mean broadening civic space while guaranteeing freedom of expression and association to ensure that vulnerable groups have access to justice and their voices get due recognition in government policies. Fourth, educate and build awareness on human rights. This is one of the pillars of the UN's work across countries in the region, alongside the development, humanitarian, and peace pillars. We have also seen the positive impact of advocating human rights within the United Nations, of ensuring that the organization applies a zero tolerance of all forms of abuse, and have put in place access to justice mechanisms and measures to redress. We encourage building a whole of society collective understanding of rights and duties, of the challenges and areas for improvement, but also channels to voice concern and denounce violations. Fifth, educate and build awareness on climate change and its implications for the country and the people. What do we mean by fully decarbonizing energy supplies? Why is reversing forest loss and land degradation important? How is being a global sink vital for Malaysians and for the planet as a whole? Evidence shows that the younger generation is extremely worried about climate change, but aren't sure how to engage to protect their right to a healthy future. Behavioral change can only happen if everyone understands why it's important. To remote and peripheral areas, to poor coastal communities, but also to young person living in KL. And this is everyone's role: the media, NGOs, school teachers, technology. Ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia has pledged to advance and protect human rights, prioritizing an in-depth review of several laws in response to the UPR recommendations and in compliance with the conventions the country is party to. It is encouraging to see the government's engagement with SUHAKAM and human rights and sustainability champions on several pressing issues. And as we focus on the nexus today between climate action, environment sustainability, and human rights, we're delighted to have such an impressive lineup of panelists that will share with us their insights. However, the dialogue that we are here today for must not and cannot end here. We must collectively find ways to take the deliberations forward. We must act for those whose fundamental rights are violated and future jeopardized. The UN country team in Malaysia remains committed to the UN Secretary General's call for action on human rights, an inspiration but also a robust foundation for our work and partnership with the government, with SUHAKAM, with human rights defenders, with civil society, businesses, young people and vulnerable groups in urban and rural areas. It is our duty to spare no effort to explain, raise awareness and advocate, not only when we commemorate the Human Rights Day, but in every action that we take to protect the dignity and worth of every human person. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency.
Let me just clean this if you allow me.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the recorded message by the Honorable Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, to deliver the official address and officiate the launch of the Human Rights Day 2021 celebration.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Osman Hashim, SUHAKAM Chairman, Her Excellency Karima El Khoury, UN Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, Yang Berbahagia Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamilah Mahmud, Executive Director, Sunway Center for Planetary Health, distinguished panelists, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Bagi pihak Wisma Putra, saya mengucapkan selamat datang dan terima kasih kepada semua yang sama-sama menghadiri sambutan Hari Hak Asasi Manusia pada hari ini. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is delighted to once again join hands with the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department, the National Human Rights Commission, SUHAKAM, and the United Nations Office in Malaysia in commemorating this day, on which the UDHR was adopted some 73 years ago. Over the decades, the document has proven visionary enough to withstand time and various challenges. Even though the drafters of the UDHR could not have foreseen the devastating impacts of environmental degradation and climate change on humanity, Article 3 of the UDHR acknowledges the rights to life, while Article 25 touches on the right to adequate standard of living. 7 decades later, on 8 October 2021, the UN Human Rights Council, for the first time, passed a resolution recognizing that access to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. Alongside this, the Council also adopted a second resolution that establishes the position of a special rapporteur to promote and protect human rights globally in the context of climate change. Although we were not able to vote on the resolutions, as Malaysia is not yet a Council member, we supported and co-sponsored both resolutions as a sign of our acknowledgement that environmental degradation, climate change, and unsustainable development constitute some of the most pressing and serious threats to the ability of present and future generations to enjoy human rights, including the right to life, the rights to health, development, housing, water, and food. Some may ask, why Malaysia, a small and developing country, feels so strongly about this? As the nation develops socio-economically, we do not wish to see our development gains, prosperity, and quality of life being reversed or overturned by climate-related hazards and natural disasters. That is why in our 12 Malaysia plan, we are committed to aspire to advance green growth by implementing clean, green and resilient development agenda through a whole-of-nation approach. As Malaysia commits to conserve planetary health and aspires to achieve a net zero greenhouse gas emissions target by year 2050 at the earliest, priority will be given to low carbon and climate resilient socio-economic development, as well as conservation of natural resources and ecosystems. We are also encouraged by the decisions reached at the recent COP26 in Glasgow, notably on the way forward to pursue climate mitigation and adaptation action, as well as on the implementation of the Paris Agreement. In playing our part, Malaysia is committed to further strengthening our nationally determined contributions, the NDC. Among others, Malaysia commits to reduce its economy-wide carbon intensity by 45% against GDP compared to its previous NDC of 35% made in 2015. We have also included 7 greenhouse gases as compared to only 3 previously. With strong resolve and commitment, we believe that concrete collective action can contribute towards real ambition in reducing global greenhouse gases emission and limiting global temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Malaysia aims to strengthen our partnership with the UN, other countries, civil society, scientific experts, and all relevant stakeholders in working towards this common aim of mitigating climate change and securing better future for our children and children's children. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, starting next month, Malaysia will begin its membership in the UN Human Rights Council for the term 2022 to 2024. While Malaysia is honored by the strong support shown by the international community, it is also a reminder of the international community's high expectation for Malaysia to make good of its pledges and commitments. As a Council member, Malaysia will continue to pursue the right of access to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. To this end, Malaysia will intensify efforts to promote safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment and improve understanding of the effects of climate change on the enjoyment of human rights. At the center of it all, Malaysia will prioritize the rights of vulnerable groups, particularly children, women, the indigenous people, the disabled, and the elderly, who will be disproportionately affected by climate change. Malaysia seeks to further empower our youth to have a bigger role at all levels of decision-making. We have seen how youth have galvanized movements around the globe in pushing world leaders to take immediate action to address climate change. As our youth and children will inherit the earth from us, they are our main stakeholder in ensuring our planetary health. In conclusion, I hope you will have a rich and fruitful discussion today. We have lined up distinguished panelists from various backgrounds and expertise to exchange views on this important topic. Dengan ini, saya secara rasminya merasmikan Forum Hak Asasi Manusia tahun 2021 sempena kita menyambut Hari Hak Asasi Manusia pada hari ini. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Dato'. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and now without further ado, I am pleased to introduce the keynote speaker for today's event. Tan Sri Professor Dr. Jamila Mahmud is a medical professional with more than 2 decades experience managing crises in health, disasters, and conflict settings. She is currently the Executive Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health. Please put your hands together as I am pleased to invite Tan Sri on stage for her keynote address. Please, Tan Sri.
Thank you very much to the MC. Please keep your mask on. But I'm far from you, so I can't breathe if I'm going to speak for 15 minutes. Yang Berhormat Minister of Foreign Affairs, Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Yang Berhormat Minister in Prime Minister's Department, Datuk Sri Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, Yang Bahagia Datuk Cheong Lun Lai from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Yang Bahagia Tan Sri Osman Hashim from SUHAKAM, Your Excellencies, Karima Al-Khoury, UN Resident Coordinator, Tuan Abdul Aziz Muhammad Johdi daripada BHEUU, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen here in the room and also, I understand, many online. Assalamualaikum and good morning to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts with you today. And thank you for focusing on the environment, the rights to clean water, air, and for this year's human rights celebration. For me, human rights are both fundamental and entirely normal. What is not normal is that they so often have to be fought or argued for. During my professional life, I've always sought to uphold the rights of the people that the organizations I've worked for are trying to assist. The defense of those rights is what ultimately led me to my interest and now passion for a planetary health approach. And I am so happy that it was mentioned twice by the minister. So whoever wrote this speech, you are my new hero. And to where I am now at the Sunway Center for Planetary Health. The second preambular paragraph of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the globally agreed blueprint for a rights-based approach for all of us, states the following. Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. These words, written in the cold light of the dawn following the abject horrors of the Second World War, serve to remind us of the terror that the human race is capable of inflicting upon itself. 7 decades on, our increasing freedoms of speech, of belief, of fear, from fear and from want, are indeed signs of significant progress. And one might imagine that Eleanor Roosevelt, who led the process, and it's worth pointing out that it was a woman who chaired the drafting committee, and the others who crafted and negotiated that landmark declaration might be looking down on us with a sense of some satisfaction. Human rights have been advanced. But this is not a universal condition. As usual, those least able to defend themselves are those most likely to see their rights abused or withheld. Sadly, our collective track record since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was written is littered with human rights abuses. A quick scan today shows us that while the world is a more peaceful place, outrages still continue in our own region and across the planet. Barbarous acts continue, but their drip nature means that the conscience of mankind is less and less outraged, and our seemingly boundless freedom of speech means that sensible and grown-up debate is often drowned out by a social media which is more obsessed with BTS's latest single than the fact that many nations are riven by conflict and poverty, and that the planet is in meltdown. And so I would like to put on the table that there is a new and more fundamental breach of human rights occurring here and now that we all need to give focus to. It is a massively barbarous act as well, meted out by an economic, social, and political system which has scant interest in equity, in human rights, or in the long-term survival of the human race. This manifests as something we have labeled climate change, but it is far more than that. It is a monstrous attack on the rights and freedoms of the majority of the human race by a small but very powerful minority. Whether consciously or not, its drivers are a fundamental disrespect for the rights of all. These consequences are now manifesting as breaches in the right to life, self-determination, development, food, health, water, and sanitation and housing. It is a reality that affects every region of the world. We are all in different boats, battling the same storm. The narrative tells us that we are all in this together, or are we? Those who drive these human rights breaches are the same people who can best protect themselves from its impacts. I would argue that they have no interest or incentive to change their behaviors, and it is up to us now to find a new way forward. But let me take a step back and provide a bit more rationale to my argument here. Humanity's achievements over the last 200 years have been staggering. Think about the internal combustion engine and the use and refinement of fossil fuels. Electricity, which more than anything else in human history has driven transformation. The industrialization of gunpowder and its impact across centuries through its use by conquering powers. Penicillin and successor antibiotics, saving billions of lives and accelerating population growth. Eradication of many communicable diseases, lengthening lifespans. Aeroplanes, allowing many of us to travel around the planet as we will. At the atomic bomb, the horrors of which mean that it has only been used twice in acts of war. Computers and the internet, machines and systems which now run our planet and which have exploded economies. Solar panels, which show enormous promise in breaking our fossil fuel addiction. Artificial intelligence, which likely runs a great deal more of the planet than we give it credence for. These are amazing and perhaps also somewhat scary achievements in some cases and should not be belittled. But our careless and short-sighted use of these and many other inventions mean that many of our social and economic achievements have come at the expense of the health of the planet. We have altered a lot of the natural flows in our ecosystem, whether elemental or people-focused. We've seen massive demographic shifts and what I regard as a very welcome start to a melting pot of cultures and populations. Although our leaders' innate desire to see off threats from people who are not like us means that even this process leads to derogation of human rights in many countries around the planet, including those that purport to strongly defend these rights. And it's worth highlighting from a health perspective that consumption patterns have radically changed over the past century, and despite all our health gains, these changes are now contributing to the global burden of disease, cancers, obesity, dementia, to name a few, which has seen massively increased prevalence, and with increasing frequency and intensity, pandemic threats. Of course, most of us are consumers of these myriad inventions and advances. We have embraced what scientists and inventors have so generously provided us. But these resources have are inequitably distributed, and our current trajectory shows us that this trend is set to continue. According to the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, the world's richest 1%, those with more than $1 million, own 43.4% of the world's wealth. By and large, these people are wealthy because we made them wealthy by making use of the services they provide. At the other end of the scale, while levels of poverty have decreased quite rapidly this century, 670 million people continue to live and survive on less than $1.90 a day. If that was a country, it would be the third most populous on the planet. These people live in fear of want. They are also often people who do not enjoy freedom of speech and freedom from fear. And now we are starting to see the beginnings of a very unpleasant confluence, a collective misuse of planetary resources driven by a global culture that focuses almost entirely on consumption, seems to be driving us towards a world where our rights to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is under significant and immediate threat. So at the macro level, there is a need, in my view, to recognize this emerging reality and to include a rights-based approach in how we address it. I don't have the time to delve more deeply into this today, but I hope that you will follow my line of argument here. Ladies and gentlemen, with rights come obligations. With all the take, there must also be an equal amount of give. And this is where we are lacking and where, at an individual level, we can start to make a difference. We conveniently label the causes of our loss of these rights as climate change, to be addressed by scientists, politicians, and officials negotiating in conference rooms in far-off lands. They agree targets, but are wildly constrained in what they can deliver. And much of this is to do with each of us not being able or perhaps willing to recognize the link between our patterns of consumption and the erosion of our right to access a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. I'm arguing here that the rights we seek to maintain rely, at least in part, on a change in how we behave. And that this change needs to be something that we, as individuals, families, members of our local community, and thus of our society. COVID taught us that when there is an immediate threat to our lives, we willingly cede our rights on a temporary basis. While the existential threat we face is less immediate, it is no less potentially devastating, something to think about. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was a child, I was taught in my family how important it was to practice the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, and recycle to be a good citizen. While there is some ongoing interest with these 3 R's, they are insufficient to tackle the changes we need to see. We should be adding more R's, and you can be more creative than me, when it comes to securing our access to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Let me share a couple. Refuse. We need to learn to say no to our knee-jerk shopping habits and tendencies, and where possible, to shop locally so that we can reduce our carbon footprint. Rethink before succumbing to Black Friday sales and the upcoming 12/12 in 2 days. Bargains galore, but do we really need these items? Repair. Something ripped or not working, rather than throwing it away, give them a new lease of life by repairing them. Rot. Make compost for your plants, all natural instead of fertilizers. It's essential to remember that food does not decompose in a landfill. Instead, it creates methane, the most harmful greenhouse gas, with more than 20 times the global warming capacity of carbon dioxide. It's not just CO2. We need to work with organizations like the Lost Food Project, a food bank that works to reduce the amount of food that goes to landfills. It collaborates with food distributors and suppliers to salvage food to share with underprivileged people around the country. Malaysian app Grub Cycle is a social supermarket that is dedicated to reducing food wastage. Grub Cycle is split between different product offerings, such as Grub Groceries, that sells and delivers surplus food products from supermarkets at an affordable cost with no delivery costs, so start downloading the app. There's also Grub Homemade that transforms surplus or unwanted fruits and vegetables into end products like pineapple, jam, or cabbage kimchi that have a longer lifespan. Reuse or repurpose. How do we repurpose our clothes? Do we give them away? Do we make them into kain buruk or rags? In one of the orang asli kampungs that I visited recently in Endau Rompin, back when the outreach vaccination program was ramping up, they repurposed plastic bottles to be used as compound walls for their water system. In Norway, a tech startup called Othello aims to build houses out of 100% recycled plastic, while also promoting adequate, sustainable, and affordable housing for all. They have mixed the plastic waste with other materials and elements and have started producing components to build 3 demonstration homes in Nairobi, Yaoundé, and Dakar. On a personal level, you can swap single-use items for packaging that can be used over and over again. Reinvent foods that are going bad, freeze them, cook them, compost them. If you can't make use of clothes, then someone else might be able to. Friends, family, carousel, bundle stores. There are so many options to choose from. And I want to add that Sunway, where I work, has committed to sustainability, and you will see that there are no plastic bottles in this hotel. How many of us actually make noise about this and tell the hotels that you will not drink from plastic bottles? Unless we change our behaviors. I carry my water bottle everywhere I go, but this has to begin from us. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now focus a little on the right to health and by extension planetary health. Our careless use of the world's resources is resulting in enormous damage to human health, whether it's manifested in the consequences of climate change, such as the increased pandemic risks and incidents, undernutrition due to crop failures, disease due to clean water scarcity, as we pollute our water sources through overuse of chemical fertilizers, or dietary problems through perhaps seafood degradation, as we inadvertently feed our fish stocks with microplastics. If we want our environmental rights to be upheld, we need to change not only our individual behaviors, but also our relationship with this bounteous planet that we live on. I'm a realist, and I believe that harmony between people and planet is essential, because a safe, clean, healthy, and a sustainable environment is integral to the full enjoyment of a wide range of human rights, including the rights to life, health, food, water, and sanitation. Without a healthy environment, we are unable to fulfill those aspirations. But this requires work, and I'm convinced that planetary health is key. It is an integrated way of improving our relationship with the planet. It focuses on achieving the highest attainable standards of health, well-being, and equity worldwide, all within safe environmental limits. It puts forth a much stronger focus on how our political, economic, and social systems must change to truly protect us and the Earth's natural systems so that the planet and people can thrive together. So at the Sunway Center for Planetary Health, what we are doing is looking at 5 issues which we believe have a major bearing on the health of the planet. All of these have connections to the upholding of our individual and collective rights. We need to work together more effectively to prevent the next pandemic, having seen the devastation caused to societies across the planet and what amounts in effect to suspension of many of our rights and obligations that we hold today and we hold dear. We must redouble our efforts to tackle the climate emergency. Ignorance can no longer be an excuse. We need to make our cities healthier by addressing socio-economic inequalities, achieving health and well-being, and ensuring environmental sustainability in urban populations. We need to make our economies fairer for us and for the planet, and we need to make sure that our food systems are sustainable. If we can address together these 5 huge issues, then we stand a chance of maintaining the rights and freedoms that Eleanor Roosevelt and her team of drafters envisioned 73 years ago. History shows us that the establishment of particular rights come as a result of people advocating, demonstrating, and fighting for them. here and now, it is essential that we all be proactive, take action, and push for an all-of-society approach to tackle these 5 key issues. I hesitate to use the word fight, but we are at crossroads, and the action that needs to be taken at this point needs to be somewhat radical. Before I end, let me challenge us all a bit with some new thinking. What if nature had legal rights? What if animals and the forest could sue us? It sounds funny, but if you've been to South America, the concept of Pachamama is very much alive, the rights of the land. And in Ecuador, it has been incorporated in the last 12 years in its legal frameworks. Dolphins, can they sue us? Well, in Philippines, a gentleman called Antonio Oposa, who won the Magsaysay Award in 2009, fought for the rights of his children, the unborn, and sea creatures, and actually sued a mining corporation in Philippines who was trying to encroach into dolphin-laden waters, and won the case. So it's not so funny, and maybe SUHAKAM can extend its mandate to also look at protecting nature. After all, when you really think about it, where we live and what we depend on for our survival and well-being, the ultimate protection of our individual and collective human rights rests on the health of the planet. Is it too much of a stretch to argue that the planet has rights too? Perhaps it doesn't matter. Ultimately, if we continue to ignore respecting the rights of the planet, it will still find a way to recover. Although that can happen only in one of 2 ways, with us or without us. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we continue this morning's program with a panel discussion titled Access to Safe, Clean, Healthy and Sustainable Environment as a Human Right. This multi-stakeholder panel session aims to bring different perspectives on the topic. The session will be moderated by Tengku Nur Christina Petri, Senior Researcher in Institute of Strategic and International Studies, Malaysia. Without further ado, I have the pleasure to invite Tengku Nur Christina and our panelists on stage. Please, ladies and gentlemen.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I had to make sure that you all can hear me. Good morning, everyone. To those who are present today and to those joining us virtually. Happy Human Rights Day. My name is Christina and I'm your moderator. I'm very honored to be here to be able to moderate and be in the presence of such distinguished speakers. And if I could just begin with introducing our speakers for today. We first have Mr. Ahmad Farid bin Muhammad, the Deputy Undersecretary of the Climate Change Division from the Ministry of Environment and Water, CASA. He will be joining us virtually. We also have Dr. Katinka Wemberger, Chief of the Environment and Development Policy Section of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. She will also be joining us virtually from Bangkok today. We also have the respectable Yang Berbahagia Datuk Mah Weng Kwai, Commissioner SUHAKAM. Yang Berbahagia Datin Sri Sunita Rajakumar, Chairperson and Founding Member of Climate Governance Malaysia. And last but not least, Mr. Muhammad Shakib Shahril Nizam, former youth focal point on climate finance to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Welcome, distinguished speakers. Before we begin, I would like to clarify the format and flow of progression for today. The session will begin with a 10-minute presentation by each speaker. After each presentation, we will proceed to a Q&A session, which will last for approximately 35 minutes. In total, this panel discussion will be around an hour and a half. I urge and invite those tuning in and those present here today to actually give us your questions and comments as well as feedback. And we must all remember that no question, comment, or feedback is silly enough for you to put forward and ask. And please also remember to state your name as well as organization, because we would welcome and really like to actually extend these conversations and discussions to have them beyond these four walls here today. So now that we have that out of the way, we can begin. But just before that, if I may, I would like to ease the conversation and just focus and mention on how important this year's Human Rights Day is. It is very much significant because not only are we celebrating Human Rights Day, but we are recognizing and celebrating the fact that with Resolution 4813, as was mentioned beforehand by our keynote speakers, it was just recognized this year on the 8th of October. And it is such an honor for all of us to be here to be discussing this very important topic and to see how we are able to understand more and collectively ensure that this right is upheld for not just everyone here in this room, but everyone around the world. So now, without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, who's joining us virtually, Mr. Ahmad Farid bin Muhammad, the Deputy Under-Secretary of the Climate Change Division from the Ministry of Environment and Water, Qatar. And Encik Ahmad Farid, are you joining us virtually online?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine, sir.
All right. You can start my presentation, right? All right, thank you, Tengku Christina, as moderator for this session. Yang YB Datuk Sri Wan Junaidi Tengku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister, Parliament and Law, Tan Sri Osman Hashim, SUHAKAM Chairman, Ms. Karina Al-Khoury, UN President Coordinator from Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei, Tan Sri Jamilah Mahmud, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salawat dan salam kepada Junjungan Besar Nabi Muhammad SAW. A very good morning, and I hope that all of you are staying safe and healthy through this COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, SUHAKAM, and United Nations for organizing this event today. The Ministry of Environment and Water, Qatar, is delighted to be part of this event. I really focused on environmental degradation and climate change, on the enjoyment of human rights, as well as to explore sustainable environmental solutions, is the right theme, as it will ultimately create momentum and synergy for the ongoing conversation on climate change and environment, especially after a milestone has been achieved in COP26 held in Glasgow, UK recently. Ladies and gentlemen, since I come from Climate Change Division, I will talk more about the climate change. Indeed, climate change and also COVID-19, the twin Cs are providing to be a twin engines for concern and despair. Both are global common threat that require a common global solution. Just as we need a vaccine for COVID-19, climate change still requires urgent solution that can wait for a generation. We managed to reach some consensus in Glasgow, but a lot of things need to be done in order to keep the temperature well 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. The impact of climate change is global in scope and unprecedented in various economies of scale, shifting weather patterns that threaten food production to rapidly rising severe rise that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding. Without drastic action now, adapting to this impact in the future will be more difficult and even more offensive. Can you go to the next slide, please? Sorry, I cannot see the slide in my screen. Can someone show the screen in my screen as well? Okay.
There you go.
Okay, glad to be in this forum today. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, before we start my presentation today, just a bit background about the climate change. Basically, just to introduce a bit about the definition of climate change from the UNFCCC. A change of climate change is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alter the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. Okay, for example, if we burn coal for the power generation, so indirectly we emit a lot of CO2, and then same also when we use our car or lorry for our transportation, so we also emit CO2 and also the other gases. Okay. Okay, now I just want to show about some findings from the Working Group 1 of the AR6 Assessment Report 6 from the IPCC in Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So it has been held recently. So basically, their findings shows that activity manusia contribute to 1.1 degree warming since 1980 to 119. So that means show that current temperature up to 1.1 degrees Celsius. If you look at our temperature that we plan to hold for the Paris Agreement, we plan to hold the temperature well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursue effort to reduce the temperature up to 1.5. Now, with the current trend, it shows that we are heading to 1.5 very soon. So it's a wake-up call for us. If you look at your chart F, it's showing that the temperature already 1.1, and you show to at the right side, it's showing that the correlation or the impact of the natural variability and also from the human activities. So the below that is the activities, the impact from the natural variability, it is from solar and volcanic, the activity from the we got that from earthquake, and also from earthquake we also have the volcanic. So this only a very small impact. But if you at the top one, you can show that the impact from the human is very significant there. Okay, next slide.
Sorry to interfere. I'm quite particular in time, so I would just like to inform you that we have about 5 minutes left.
All right, sure. I will go fast. Okay, this is a scenario by the IPCC. From the lowest scenario to the highest scenario, it shows that with all the scenario, we are in the right pathway to reach 1.5 within 20 years. This is very alarming for all. Then we need to do more to avoid from the global warming crisis in the future. Okay, next. Okay, this is a bit about the climate change projections for Malaysia. From the annual temperature, annual rainfall, and sea level rise. Okay, next. Okay, this is another projection up to 2100. You can see that the range is between 0.67 and 0.73. 0.73 meters. That means below than 1 meter. If this is stay, that means that we are quite safe actually. But we don't know in the near future whether the new projection that will increase the projection of the sea level rise for Malaysia. That will be a more alarming for us. Next. Okay, this is our dasar perubahan iklim that getting to now. There are 5 basically principles. Number 1, pembangunan mampan. Number 2, pembangunan sekitar sumber asli. And number 3 is pelaksanaan secara bersepadu, 4 perlibatan pusat, and also number 5 pertanggungjawab sama berbeza dan keupayaan tersendiri. CBDRC is principle by UN itself, where we also have the same tanggungjawab, which we need to reduce our emission, but with our keupayaan. That means we emit less when we do less. Okay, next. This is some of the mitigation that we are doing. This is come from Malaysian BHEUU 3 recently reported. I cannot see the slide. All right. We have renewable energy, transportation, reserve activity, biogas from farm manure, effluent, and also forestry. Next. Okay, some action for adaptation. Of course, the famous one is flood management, coastal management, water resources, food security, as well as public health. Okay, next. Okay, a bit about the Commission Institution Framework. We have my CAC chaired by Prime Minister and also comprises members from the Federal Minister and also Chief Minister and also Minister Besar. And we also supported by the National State Committee on Climate Change, chaired by the Secretary General of CASA, and also the members comprises from the Ministry as well as all NGOs and private sectors. And there was also some committee. These are all the stakeholders that we engage. Next. Okay, these are some obligations that we oblige to. So the recent court decision also is also related to this. Okay, and then Paris Agreement know about this. I don't need to for that to discuss more about this. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is our latest NDC. We target to reduce our economic carbon intensity of 44% in 2030 compared to 25 levels. The Minister of Foreign Affairs also highlighted this issue, this NDC. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is our current JG emission based on the BHEUU 3. Our net emission million ton, you can see at the arrow right there, is quite high actually compared to the few years back. We are already experiencing a net zero, even negative emission for last 20 years. But now we are, as a progressive country, we are moving ahead, and now we are 75 million. Okay, next. And if we are going to be net zero, the formula is A plus B is equal to 0. The top one, the orange one, all the emission, and the green one, the below B is the thing. So that means if we need to, if we want to achieve the net zero, we need to reduce our the emission at the top there, and then at the center we need to increase further on the sink part, on the green one. And the best thing, of course, the net negative. A plus B below 0. The next slide.
I hate to interrupt you, Encik Farid, but we
Yeah.
have about a minute left on the clock.
Sure.
is it okay
I'll go to the last
summarize?
slide. Okay.
Thank you.
Can you go to the last slide before? Thank you.
Is it okay for us to go to the last slide?
Yeah, last slide
For us
before.
to
Thank you,
summarize?
please.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, here. This slide. Okay, just to highlight a bit activities that we are doing right now. Okay, the first, we are already edited our NDC, and then we are reviewing the national climate change policy, and we also I would like to inform that we already completed our climate change legal framework, just completed recently, and this will be the basis for Malaysia to build our climate change act soon. Many people talking about the framework for the climate change, so these are the basis for us. And we also need to do the LTLAS for prediction of net zero. And then we're going to prepare the national communication or national adaptation plan, which is very critical to adapt the impact of the climate change. And also the latter one, we also develop the VCM guidance, basically to give direction for the carbon trading. With that, I thank you. Thank you very much for your time, for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Encik Farid. I think you've given us a very enlightening and really good insight on what the government has been up to in terms of fulfilling its obligation. So thank you very much. I would now like to invite our second speaker, who's joining us virtually from Bangkok, Dr. Katinka Wernberger, Chief of Environment and Development Policy Section of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Dr. Wernberger, you have the floor. There you go. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. I am not sure if you're mute on your side or is it our side. But I'm pretty sure we can get this addressed soon. So just everyone If I could just bear with me for a moment. Thank you.
We just try again.
Ah, yes, we can hear you now. Perfect. You have the floor, Doctor.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants. Firstly, let me thank the government of Malaysia, the Human Rights Commission, and also our colleagues of the United Nations Office in Malaysia for the invitation to speak at this very important meeting today. And I think it already came out in the opening interventions earlier. The celebration of the Human Rights Day, of course, provides us with an opportunity to really appreciate the progress that we've made since the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But it also also gives us the opportunity to reflect on the challenges which must be addressed in years to come. But this year, the celebration of the human rights is even more inspiring because of the recent adoption on the 8th of October 2021 of the Human Rights Council resolution, which recognizes the right to a safe, a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right, specifying that this right is important for the enjoyment of human rights. So really, this resolution understands a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a precondition, as the enabling environment that will allow us to enjoy other human rights. And in other words, we cannot truly exercise our human rights if we do not secure a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The resolution encourages us to build capacities, to enhance cooperation, to share good practices, to build synergies, to adopt new policies on biodiversity and ecosystems, and to honor obligations and commitments in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. While these considerations provide us with very clear guidance on the work ahead of us, they are also a reminder that really we cannot separate human rights from the overall achievement of the 2030 Agenda. Recognizing or recognition of the relationship between human rights and the environment is not completely new in the Southeast Asian region. In the ASEAN region, the constitutions of 4 member states explicitly mention the right to a healthy environment. That's Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. The constitutions of Cambodia, of Laos, and Myanmar contain explicit references to the protection of the environment and natural resources by the state or its citizens. And Brunei Darussalam, Malaysia, and Singapore all have laws in place that provide for environmental protection, biodiversity conservation, and control of pollution and waste. Environmental rights encompass substantive rights, or the fundamental rights, but also procedural rights, which are necessary to achieve the former. And I would like to talk a little bit about the operative word in the topic of our meeting today, access. Procedural rights include 3 fundamental access rights. It's the access to information, public participation, and access to justice. And all of them are enshrined in Principle 10 of the Declaration. The provision states that environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens, and that each individual should have appropriate access to information and the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes. And actually, there's really good evidence out there that environmental rights provisions are linked to better environmental outcomes. So enhancing these provisions provides for an opportunity to accelerate action and to strengthen, to increase environmental performance in our region. But unfortunately, we still see some fundamental challenges in our region which hinder environmental protection. And these include, for example, gender imbalances, they include the declining civil society participation, the convergence between inequality and climate change. In some countries of our region, we see obstructed, we see narrowed, repressed civil spaces. For example, between 2015 and 2019, at least 472 human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists were killed, and 21 forcibly disappeared in 24 countries across Asia and the Pacific. Defenders of environmental rights are particularly at risk. We know that they're subject to harassment, to arbitrary arrests, to detentions, threats, and also killings. Such challenges could be addressed through sensitive policies. And to accelerate progress in the region and really achieve transformation, an empowered, inclusive, and equal Asia-Pacific that allows the full exercise of human rights is crucial. As part of a project that we worked on with the government of Sweden, we identified a couple of elements and factors for inclusive engagement of marginalized and vulnerable groups that can lead to better environmental outcomes. And they include removing institutional and structural barriers that inhibit and restrict vulnerable and marginalized groups from access to resources. This includes crafting spaces for deliberation and dialogue. It includes enabling ownership, promoting the ability to define objectives that affect outcomes and influence the decision-making processes. And finally, also the institutionalization of engagement processes as a way of ensuring that the needs of marginalized and vulnerable groups especially enter formal planning processes. In respect to our way forward, or the way forward, let me just conclude by saying at SGAP, we're currently working very closely with the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights to draw a roadmap towards the development of a regional instrument on access rights. In this work, we're very much building on the experience and the expertise of other regions. The Aarhus Convention and the SUHAKAM Agreement provide blueprints for a framework that we aim to build with member countries here in Asia and the Pacific. And in this work, we are cooperating very closely with partner UN agencies, in particular UNEP and OHCHR, to support our member states and civil society. We believe at SGAP that a regional legally binding instrument on access rights in Asia and the Pacific is feasible, and that it could be an enabler also to build back better as we make gradual progress in recovery, with more access to information, justice, and participation in the post-pandemic context. Entry points in the ASEAN region especially already exist. For example, across ASEAN countries, there are clear commonalities in environmental impact assessment processes, and these could form the basis to advance a more harmonized approach to access rights. And Malaysia, of course, as a member state of ASEAN, we believe is in a position to catalyze this process, including by, for example, taking leadership in an AICHR task force to develop the draft agreement. So, Excellencies, distinguished participants, as we celebrate human rights today, let me call together, have all stakeholders on board to advance environmental protection through the full exercise of fundamental rights, really leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hornberger. That was such an excellent presentation on the regional perspectives as well as input in regards to today's theme. Now, we'll move on to some of our physical speakers that are here today. I would like to invite Datuk Mah Weng Kwai, who is the Commissioner of SUHAKAM. Datuk, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator, Tunku Christina. Honorable Ministers, Your Excellencies, Chairman of SUHAKAM, Tan Sri Osman, Your Excellency, Ms. Karima, Dr. Cheong, my fellow commissioners, my fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Selamat or Happy Human Rights Day. This is a very auspicious occasion, and I'm very glad that we are able to assemble here and to take part in this forum. Now, my topic for this morning, and I'm going to speak a little faster than I usually do, because I think I've only got about 10 minutes, and I will crave indulgence if I do go over time for a couple of minutes. So we are, of course, talking about access to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right. But my particular topic this morning is the role of NHRIs in advocating and addressing environmental issues as human rights. A quick word about SUHAKAM. For those of you who may know, SUHAKAM is not a NGO, it is not a CSO, it is a statutory body having been passed and having been established to an Act of Parliament passed in 1999. We are 22 years old this year, and I would think that perhaps over the years you would have heard that, oh, SUHAKAM is a paper tiger, SUHAKAM is a toothless bulldog, because we have our mandate on paper, but still we don't have enough bite. But I would like to believe that after 22 years, we do have some baby teeth, and we will try to gnaw at issues, and I suppose that's where we are coming from. So our role is actually to fulfill, to respect, and to protect human rights. And you have a whole range of the various rights, but of course, very recently, environmental rights has now been recognized as a human right. And this was as recent as 8th of October, and the United Nations Human Rights Council has declared the environmental rights is recognized as a human right. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to share a word with you, share the meaning or understanding of a particular word. You may have heard about this, you may have not, and this is a word, ecocide. Well, you have heard of homicide, you have heard of infanticide, you have heard of insecticide and weedicide and whatnot. And you also have heard that the damage to the environment is a threat to our very existence on this planet. So ecocide is perhaps something that we should think about, and I'll talk about this a little later. If I can please go into slide 2. Yes, thank you. Now, this really is talking about Article 5.1 of the Federal Constitution of Malaysia, and essentially it's how can human rights institutions support a human right-centered approach in addressing environmental issues. We obviously have come across environmental challenges. We have the climate crisis, climate change, depletion of resources, and so on. But Article 5.1 of the Federal Constitution, of which you will be very familiar, is that no one shall be deprived of his life or liberty save in accordance with the law. And I think we just have to go to the next slide to give you a perspective of what we mean by right to life. And this was very succinctly described by Justice Gopal Sri Ram in the case of Tan Teck Sing against Suruhanjaya Perkhidmatan Pendidikan, something which our chairman mentioned just now. But to highlight what was said is that right to life, the expression life appearing in Article 5 does not refer to mere existence. It incorporates all those facets that are an integral part of life itself and those matters which go to form the quality of life. Of these are rights to seek and be engaged in lawful and gainful employment and to receive those benefits that our society has to offer to its members. It includes the right to a reasonably healthy and pollution-free environment. So this has been recognized by the courts way back in 1992, even before SUHAKAM was established. Now, quite apart from the SUHAKAM Act itself, the role of the NHRI is not just within our boundaries. We are members of CNF, that's the Southeast Asian Association for Human Rights Institutes. We're also a member of GANRI, which is the Global Alliance of National Human Rights. So we are not just by ourselves. We most certainly work and interact with international organizations. At the same time, the mandate of SUHAKAM under the Act, under Section 4, is to advise the government, is to recommend actions to be taken, and to try to see to how we can accede to the international treaties and to uphold international obligations. So that's all part of the role that is being done by SUHAKAM. All this, of course, the work that's being done by SUHAKAM in a year is all recorded in our annual report. Lately, there has been quite a bit of talk about this annual report. We have to get it ready by the end, before the year end, and then it is laid before Parliament. But the big question here is that whether laying before Parliament merely means putting it on the table of the MPs, or will there be time to debate the report itself? We managed to get a chance to debate this report 2 years ago, but well, hopefully in the years to come, this will be something that is possible. Now, if I may go on to the next slide. This is the roles in environmental issues. NHRI, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. These are the various roles, and I will not really need to read all of them, but just to highlight that, to say that our roles, given the mandate that we have to protect and promote human rights, essential that we promote, we spearhead or whatever activity that's being done within the country and without to highlight the various issues that we have. So we do our work through RTDs, roundtable discussions, seminars, conferences, talking to you good people in a forum like this today. And also we can have public inquiries. The Act enables the SUHAKAM to hold public inquiries, much as we had in the inquiry on organised, on indigenous people's rights. We, of course, collect data and evidence, and to find out what are the root causes of the problems that affect the country. And, of course, as far as the environment is concerned, a very common problem, of course, is open burning, the dumping of garbage, the import of plastic waste. Now, this is something which is very current, and I do not know why we are actually going down this road, because this happened since 2018, when China banned the import of plastic waste into its country, and then Malaysia became a very important importing country. When we can't even look after our own plastic waste, but here we are, for that extra few dollars, people are importing plastic waste, and that's causing a big problem to our environment as well. Okay, I will go straight into the complaints mechanism that I would like to share with you. We can go on to the next slide, please. Under complaints mechanism.
Sorry, I believe these were three slides before.
Yeah. Before this? Okay, I'm not sure whether we are on the same page, but anyway, we are talking about complaints mechanism. Now, within SUHAKAM itself, we have a complaints division, which simply means that we have officers there 24/7 to receive complaints as and when they do come in. People do walk into the office, people communicate with us in a variety of ways, and our job, of course, is to look into these problems, and whether we do a desktop inquiry or actually do something more by way of a public inquiry. But very importantly is to get onto the ground and to actually verify the facts and the evidence for ourselves. Example, we have pollution in rivers, and when complaints like this do come to us, our team actually goes onto the ground to see what is happening. And very recently, just as I'm speaking, just last week, we had a coalition of about 12 NGOs. They came and presented a memorandum or a complaint to SUHAKAM, and this is the Cerah Anti-Haze Action Coalition. Their concern is the annual seasonal haze problem that we have. Now, this is very timely because this is the wet season. We don't really see haze, but come July, August, the dry season, we will have the haze problem. So this is actually planning and working ahead. So whether or not this will result in just a desktop inquiry or we will have a public inquiry is work or things to be seen. The way forward, I think what is very important is to actually have a separate and dedicated desk for environmental issues within SUHAKAM itself. Yeah, we otherwise just to put it under a big umbrella may not be so focused on this problem. We need to keep records, we need to keep statistics to monitor recurring abuses, recurring violations, and to perhaps come to a stage where we will be able to name and shame violators, breaches, and offenders of environmental rights, all in the name of transparency and accountability. And SUHAKAM, of course, is we are obliged to promote the culture of respect for human rights, and also not just generally in human rights, but human rights in business, because we do know that it's business that actually generates a lot of pollution and affects the environment, like I was mentioning just now, water pollution, haze pollution, and so on. If I may, very quickly, the next slide. This gives you some stats on the water pollution problems that we have got. Yeah, if you can go into that one as well as the next slide. I won't go into details, but just to highlight that since 2018, we have been having very consistent complaints about water pollution in this country. We have Sungai Kim Kim, Sungai Selangor, Sungai Semenyih, and a few other sungais. And this, of course, affects all of us very directly. We have a variety of nature of complaints. If we can go on to the next slide, nature of complaints. One more, please. I think I'm just not synced with this slides. But anyhow, as far as the complaints go, there are a variety of complaints that affect the environment, from coastal reclamation to various land issues, land encroachment issues, illegal logging. That's a high number of complaints. There are deforestation issues, pollution, and even dam construction of dams. Okay, last but not least, if I may go into the slides on access to remedy and what happens when there are breaches, the breaches identified, investigations are done, what do we do? What can we do as a human rights institute? Now, right, this slide is a very important slide. It talks about strategic litigation versus SLAP. SLAP is for strategic law action, strategic lawsuit action against public participation. Now, you might be wondering what this SLAP is. Can we go on to the next slide? Yes, SLAP. Now, a quick word about this. Now, you obviously know about public interest litigation, and you do know about people wanting to take cases either on their own behalf or on behalf of a bigger group of persons. And where there are public interest issues, people go to court and question, and we call this as strategic litigation. Yeah? So you might ask, what's the role of SUHAKAM? Well, our role is to be there to support this kind of litigation. We can hold watching briefs in court. We can appear as amicus curiae in court, so that these issues are fully ventilated before the court. Because if you can identify the problems, you know what the problem is, but you do not have access to remedy, access to justice, really that is stifling the efforts of everyone concerned. So it's really important to have litigation in this area and to have a mechanism for this kind of litigation. The big question that the courts will ask, and the big challenge is, do you have locus standi? Do you have a standing to bring this issue to court? And this is where the arguments have to be fully ventilated to make sure that because it is a public interest issue, this gives the locus to the party that's coming to court. What about the reaction of the respondents when they do come to court? Now, obviously, anyone who's being pulled to court won't be happy. And sometimes you will have parties taking preemptive action. And this is where SLAP comes in. I mean, I think the acronym doesn't, it doesn't augur well, because nobody likes to be slapped in the face. But this is strategic lawsuits against public participation. What this means is that an activist or a human rights defender makes a statement about water pollution, about degradation or deforestation of the jungle and so on. And there you have these big contractors, big money, and to make sure that you do not go further to file any strategic litigation in court, they take the first step, the first preemptive step, and that is they go to court and try to have a case based on defamation, or they will say, look, you are infringing on what we have got. We are properly licensed, and you are now saying this, that, and the other. They might go for an injunction and so on. So really, this is a phenomenon which is now slowly creeping into our jurisprudence. We do see this kind of cases, and it is really important that the courts are fully aware of this and not to allow this to happen at the expense of natural justice, at the expense of justice to the rakyat. There's one case that I think that needs consideration.
My
this is the
apologies,
case.
Dato'. We're kind of running short
1
on
minute.
time.
1 minute.
Perfect.
Case of
Perfect.
BHEUU Australian Gold Mining Syndrome Berhad against Hui Shi Lei. This is a 2019 case. This was an allegation by a group of residents saying that the activities of BHEUU Australian mining was causing diseases such as cancer and so on. And they held a survey, and but they were brought to court, but the federal court held that the company, the claimant, had failed to prove that the survey that the respondents, the residents were relying on was false, and the court held that the statements were made without malice. So that was an important recognition of the work of the residents. So to conclude, I think I would very quickly say that now that Malaysia is a member of the Human Rights Council for 2022 to 2024, it's even more incumbent upon us to be working closely with MOFA, with BHEUU, to ensure that our national agenda will be achieved. And we can do this through legal aid. We can do this by reporting to the special rapporteurs on environment and so on. And last but not least, a word on COP26. Without being cynical, I think I most certainly agree with some of the comments made on COP26 that this conference was a historically shameful dereliction of duty when it came to the discussions, because nothing much has come out of it. So whether it's COP26 or have we copped it? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please think about the various points that have been raised. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dato' Ma, for that informative and excellent presentation. I think you have really empowered us with more knowledge and information, so thank you very much, Dato'. So for our next speaker, I would like to invite Datin Sri to the podium to give a presentation.
Thank you, Dato' Ma. That was definitely very informative. So for the first time, access to safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment has been recognized as a human right. Why is this happening now? Why is it important? Lam, I need my slides out. Why is it important to safeguard our right to such an environment? What is behind the tremendous momentum by allocators of capital, such as institutional investors, to demand for increased disclosure on how businesses are affecting the environment? As you'll see on this chart, for millennia, societies and civilizations have thrived because of climatic stability. The Industrial Revolution was an unprecedented breakthrough, which led to dramatic increases in not only economic growth, as you'll see, but an increase in human population and life expectancy. We understand that everything we do is extractive of the environment: water, air, arable land, but this tremendous rate of economic and population growth relies on a tremendous rate of extraction of natural resources. Lam. Thank you, Lam. The science is clear, the data is available, there is a direct causality between human activity, which is extractive and polluting, and the impact on the environment, the triple crisis that we've heard of climate, biodiversity, and pollution, which is exceeding planetary boundaries. So this is an example of a classic market failure where the cost of pollution is borne by society at large, but the profits are reaped by the polluters. So naturally, when we look at per capita carbon footprint, not all countries have the same levels of population, and the largest countries tend to be the Asian countries. Put another way, some of the largest countries in the world have the lowest GDP per capita and lowest carbon footprint, whereas countries that are not as large actually have very high carbon footprints. Some countries live as though they are living on 4 or 5 planets worth of natural resources, and globally as a world, within 7 months of this year, we have already exceeded what we call the Earth Overshoot Day, where humanity's demand for ecological services exceeds what the Earth can regenerate. And if you're an exporting country like Malaysia, then we exceed this within the first 5 months. So the consequences are very clear. Science is informing us that we should expect major heat waves, many unable to work out of doors, leading to death, and as well as this part of the world being particularly vulnerable. So all of this is very clear. These are the things that we have to look forward to. And especially for a country like Malaysia, where we are less than 0.7% of global emissions, we are also particularly vulnerable for increased precipitation, in addition to heat waves. And this is going to give rise to flash flooding in a country where we're 80% urbanized, so the built environment doesn't allow for the earth to absorb the surplus water. And of course, we also know that when one system crashes, it is likely to trigger a cascade, also a systemic environmental collapse. And this is not just happening on the other side of the world, but also closer to home in states such as Pahang, where we can see this already happening. So not only the science is clear, but we also have the data. Which are the businesses that are emitting and therefore should be responsible for the chaos and devastation that should follow? We also know which are the banks which are funding this. Who is providing the capital for these businesses that enable them to continue down their destructive path? So all of this data is available. So what is next? Independent assessments are of sovereign credit ratings that are going to see up to 6 notches of downgrade. Now this is going to affect your cost of financing, this is going to affect your foreign currency, your ability to export. And also courts are stepping up to say that yes, businesses should be liable. Now obviously it's specific to different jurisdictions, but we are seeing this in many advanced economies, and legal opinions have been issued in over 20 countries confirming this as well. So let's take an example of one business. This is an example which a climate activist in Singapore, Asad Razuk, is fond of using. Toyota, the world's largest automaker. So their carbon footprint is really only 20% of the entire value chain. But if you assume that they are going to be responsible for the entire value chain, because after all, they are providing businesses to their suppliers, then what is the price of carbon that would wipe out their entire annual profits of $22 billion US. So this is a simple calculation that we can make. It's $77 US. And this pricing is already what the EU ETS and UK ETS is already hitting. So this is the futures for European Union emissions trading scheme. And on the next slide, for UK emissions trading scheme, which only started in May, but is already trending towards $100 US. So naturally, many jurisdictions are looking at carbon pricing as a climate change tool, because this is a classic market failure, where the cost of the pollutant is borne by society at large, but the profits are kept by the emitters. So how do we correct this adjustment? For those companies that are thinking of net zero, the technologies are not available at scale. So this is an example of a direct air capture storage plant which has just started in Iceland. It's the first one, and it's removing 4,000 tons of CO2 per annum. So this is not sufficient for us to resolve our carbon mitigation problem. And if you're considering carbon offsets as well, such as these two companies were thinking of, if next year is El Nino year, you're looking at droughts, extreme heat days, it's possible that your anticipated offsets might not actually be happening.
Sorry to interrupt, Atinsri. We have about 5 minutes left. Thank you.
So on the 3rd of November, the ISSB was announced, and this is a game changer because the amount of disclosure that's going to be required from reporting entities is significantly more than what we are expecting. So this is the prototype template. The actual standard will be out in the middle of next year. And you're looking at details about how companies are going to manage their risks. What are their transition plans? How it's going to achieve the targets? How it's investing in R&D? Because these technologies are not available at scale. Including which scenarios are you relying on? Are they Paris aligned? Why this scenario is relevant to your business, what is the time horizon, what are the inputs that you are using, and what are the policy assumptions, for example, in Malaysia? Is there any signaling from the government? And so I wanted to share this with you because these scenes are things that have just happened over the last few weeks. Humans have an innate bias to listen and remember what aligns with their personal narratives and worldviews. But today, as we consider the Human Rights Day, and as the unprecedented resolutions co-sponsored by Malaysia of our right to a safe and clean environment, sustainable, we need to remember that when we have extreme weather events like this, which leads to devastation and destruction, it is natural for those who are disproportionately affected by damage of property, loss of lives, as described by Minister Saifuddin just now, they will be looking around and asking, who should be responsible? Who knew and failed to act? Who are the stewards who understood but did not manage these risks to the best of their abilities? So allocators of capital are demanding for increased reporting and disclosure. 101 prudential regulators in the NGFS who are managing the systemic risk in the financial system, and they are asking for increased disclosure. Intermediaries, as we saw, such as rating agencies, are already signaling expected downgrades of sovereign risks. Courts are issuing precedent and legal opinions that the causality is clear. Governments and businesses need to be responsible and accountable for their actions and inactions. In the face of this recognition that we all have a right to an environment which is safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable, with a renewed sense of urgency post COP26, as Dato' Ma was mentioning just now, we need to go beyond naming and shaming, I feel. How should companies and directors be held liable if they continue polluting? Especially when extreme weather events are already taking place. We already know the transition pathway which is needed as informed by science. If those responsible are fully aware of the consequences but continue with, for example, development approvals, investments in stranded assets, not investing sufficiently in adaptation efforts, withholding data which will enable informed decisions to be made, let us consider how much liability should be attached. When we are informed, we are knowledgeable, we have been given the responsibility for oversight and stewardship, but we fail to act. So I'd like to leave you with these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Datin Sri. I really think that Datin Sri's presentation was very much a reminder, and it just occurred to me about how we are about to, we're coming close to the banjir season in Malaysia, which most of the East Coast have had quite terrible experiences with. So thank you so much for giving us that reminder. And last but not least, we have Shakib, and I would like to invite you to the podium. Thank you so much.
Good morning to the Excellencies, distinguished participants, various representatives from government agencies and also intergovernmental agencies, friends, colleagues in CSO and NGO, either over here or in online. Thank you very much, Tengku Christina, as a moderator. So today I will be representing more on the youth side rather than the climate finance. Mostly I represent more on the climate finance. But today I'm more focusing on the youth. As you know that youth are the last bastion of the civilization, and most of the people in youth are the ones who affect compared to the previous generation. So if you look into like in Muar, recently like 2 days ago, in Muar, most of the youth over there affected by flood. Some of them housing areas flood, and then I saw early this year in Sembrong, one of my friends, actually it's not my friend, it's more on the colleague side, died in flood. So basically we are the ones who are affecting much more compared to the previous generation. And if we look into this, I think I'm going to skip this one. Maybe you can skip. All right, so basically when it comes to major concern of environmental rights, this is the 5 lists. And I think we have like a lot of over here. I think most of the environmental problems that is aware in Malaysia will be floods, landslides and such. It's because of a lot of factors. Maybe we can skip this slide. Next. All right, cool. So based on my previous portfolio back in youth constituency to the UNFCCC in climate finance, as I'm doing research in Malaysia, so basically we have like 2018, we have a lot of natural disaster. We have like 51 natural disaster events, 281 lives affected. And then when it comes to these people affected in long term is 3 million, and it's included 2 billion. So basically this is like within 2 decades. And if let's say we look into like post 2020, it will be much more than that. And especially when it comes to Malaysia, in current times where the floods and such had problems, maybe I can say that we can increase it to another 3 million per year. That would be the average one. And if we look into other states, we're having a problem, not just in the disaster management reduction, and at the same time, if we look into the other side, those people having a problem when it comes to the delegation and such to the PPLs. So basically when it comes to NADMA estimated 4.8 million people live in flood risk. So basically if NADMA estimates this back in 2020, maybe the number is going to increase even more if we look into the demographics and at the same time our current climate. Next. Okay, so basically UNICEF Malaysia create actually two surveys. One is National Youth Climate Change Survey and another one on climate change impact on children. I have one of my friend in the down there. One of them is a contributor to this. I think this is a very good climate change survey where if we look into it, it's 92% of young people out of 14.6 million are aware of a climate change is a climate crisis. And right now we are entering the climate emergency. So basically the response and also the concern is there. And at the same time, when it comes to action and such, we also have in a very different forms. We have grassroots, we have policies, and we have like a lot of things, international and national. And at the same time, if we look into the response by the youth, right now youth are trying to enter not just in the policy level, not just in the grassroots level, but trying to go for international level, especially like COP, Conference of Parties. So basically youth are trying to make sure that our voice is being heard. Next. So basically when it comes to this, I think this report is very interesting. Maybe you guys can check in the website later on. So basically when it comes to impact on climate change on children, I think this survey is this report is very open open my eyes actually. Like if you look into the selected studies, they choose three locations: Gaya Island, and then indigenous people in Perak, and also Setapak. So basically covers various areas of those low-income people and such. And so when it comes to climate change and low income and human rights, it is intertwined together. So basically, if we look into the impact of this report, I think it's astounding, and maybe government of Malaysia need to look at it very carefully and very truly when it comes to this. Next. So here is the reality of Malaysia. We are 61 on the list of least performing countries where children were most of the risk climate change. And then when it comes to youth as a stakeholder in this country, we are 43% out of 100% in this country. And then when it comes to, if we look into the reports and such, even Dato' Wah just now mentioned about how we look environment and also laws, we are still lack into it. We didn't put environment into constitution as clearly as possible. And at the same time, when it comes to Ms. From CGM as well, showcase that we have a lot of things that we need to cover. And if we go into COP results and such, I think I'm following climate finance, Article 6, Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. I found it quite unbelievable, but at the same time, I understand it's a political climate politics. So we have a different areas for Malaysia, and at the same time, when it comes to Malaysia as an adaptation country, right now I can say that we are not just adaptation country, but we go for loss and damage country, because some of us already lost, and also most of the locations, housing is already into floods and such. If we look into Sepang is already like half of them is already cut out by the floods. There's no more bean and such. So basically there's a loss. And when it comes to loss, government will cover a lot of damages over there, and it will be potential bring along effect on the national budgetary and such. We cannot move forward into what we call Malaysian 2050. Next. So when it comes to key factor of environmental rights, I would say this is the 5 pillars of environmental rights. We need to cover on the legal side, legal binding, make sure every single thing legal binding. When it comes to like Glasgow Declaration, I don't think it's legal binding. We should have that legal binding so that it enforces the government can protect all those rights that we need. And then when it comes to political will, I think this is the most important part of all. If let's say most of the people are focusing on this, and the politicians are not focusing on this, this is going to be a trouble when it comes to parliament, when it comes to decision-making process in the upper level side, in ministerial meeting. I think that is the most important part. And then when it comes to market, I think although most of us maybe think socialism is the final key, at the same time you need to agree that market works for the benefit of the people when it comes to giving wages and such. So basically we need to balance out both of the things. And then just transition, I think when it comes to just transition, I remember back in COP24 we're talking about just transition energy and such. So basically we need to cover on that, especially on TNB. TNB cover more on the coal, so we need to look into how we're going to make it transition available. And then this is the last part. I think like 2 days ago this thing is come out in the news. Basically when it comes to change of production, the foods, vegetables and such, we need to look back and how to respond on that. Not just pricing, but at the same time future for Malaysian, how we look into the production, how we consume food. Next.
I'm so sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we have about a minute left.
Cool. Okay.
Sorry.
All right, cool. Okay, so when it comes to this, me as a youth representation, this is the contribution of all youth in Malaysia. So since 1974, we have EPSM, Gurmeet Singh, I think most of the CSO and NGOs knows about his name. And then I think this is the list Previously, I'm with Malaysian Youth Delegation. We're focusing more on the policy side, negotiation side. Me as a former climate finance, I think former climate finance focal point, thanks to MYD giving the platform and such. And then next, we go to, this is the result of youth contribution in Malaysia since 1974. We have a lot of protests. We will not call it protests actually, we call it climate strike. And at the same time, we have lobbying negotiations, a lot of negotiations. And I think this is the best part, is we have 50 people on this track enter politics, pushing green politics. This is what we want. We want to change the ecosystem. We want to change the entire system. And then we have the government entity, we have the private entity, and also we have like auditing firm and such. I think these numbers, maybe you can look into Twitters and other professional, they are available on that. Next. So this is the youth contribution to the United Nations. So since COP8, we go bold decision making, and friends do negotiations with a lot of countries. And I think the best part of all is Climate Change Youth Advisory Council to the UN Secretary General. I think that is the most nearest alarm of all. We can go next one. So I would like to propose this one thing, which is Fusion Malaysia 2050. I learned a lot from Japan Global Future Council, which is recognized by World Economic Forum. So this the thing that I think one of the policy that we can look into forward when it comes to policy, how we mitigate mitigate things, and also we want to save Malaysia from climate extinction. And I think I will end this my presentation on the Future Malaysia 2050. So I think maybe you guys, if let's say want to discuss more on the Future Malaysia 2050, maybe we can discuss after the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shakir, for that excellent presentation. You've really broadened our minds on how far and how we have to be very much responsible and accountable for our actions in the fact that it would actually affect the environment. So that marks our presentations for today, everyone. But before we proceed with the Q&A, I would just like my online friends to submit their questions if they may. My colleague Hafiz, who's also the MC, will be helping me out with managing the questions that have been submitted online. As for those joining us here physically, if you can see, there are microphones situated in two parts of the room on chairs, one there and one there. If you do have questions, please feel free to make your way to these chairs and pick up the microphones and ask your question. I would also like to remind everyone to please state your name as well as organization, because we would like to keep in touch and actually bring the conversation forward beyond these four walls, because as we all know today, it is a very important topic that needs to be further discussed, elaborated, and commented on. And I would also not just like to invite questions, but also comments and feedbacks and responses to the presentations that we have had today. So I would just like to open the floor and ask, unless Hafiz, do you have any questions online?
Let me check.
Oh, of course. So just before that, I would just like to spare a few seconds to kind of read the room and see if anyone has any feedback.
All right, Christina, there is one.
Perfect.
Yes, one question for Mr. Shakib. There is this big fan of yours online via Zoom. The question goes as follows. Your presentation focused very much on youth. Can you give us an insight on the thoughts and concerns the youth have for the earth they are about to inherit? We have witnessed such great strides that the youth have accomplished. Can you tell us more? Thank you.
All right, when it comes to that, I think entire world, we are pushing more on the bold, aggressive, started with Greta Thunberg. I think that is the first catalyst of a very bold climate stride. And then when it comes to that, back in UNFCCC, back in Yangon, actually, Youth Constituency, we are trying to make it a very truly and at the same time systematic movement as well. nego with others. I think that is on the policy side, but on the grassroots side, I think this is the part where we need all the collective actions and such. Grassroots, not just grassroots in national level, grassroots in the state level. And I think back in Malaysia, when it comes to this thing, youth, I think we need to solidify. This is the time where we need to push that. This is generation for me, for my friends, and for the rest of us. I think if, let's say, we cannot secure this, I'm afraid that the next generation couldn't live peacefully, having a normal air, breathing air, at the same time having a very sustainable life at the same time. So I think that's the reason why we're focusing. I think Greater Tamil focusing on a very good climate strike. I think we need to have more in the government side. We need to have lobbyists, policymakers and such to understand all these things. What I understand back in Parliament, most of them not entirely focused on climate change. That's the sad part. I think YB, your opinion is PH, and the BN side we don't have. We really need that on BN and other side, because if, let's say, PH is focusing on that, it still seems as a one narrative. We need to have a collective. When it comes to climate change, there's no such thing as partisanship. There's no such thing as age gap, and as well as all of that. I think if we look into one narrative straight away, I think that's how we're going to save Malaysia from climate extinction. Yep.
Thank you so much for that. Yep. I think one thing that I really kind of got from what you said just now was the importance of also external pressure. And I think it's also important to note that this surpasses any political aims and whatnot, because it is essentially being a responsible individual that you're not just accountable for your actions, but you actually take action to reverse that. And I think that's one thing that we should focus on. Thank you for that. That was a very strong message. If I could just also kind of abuse my privileges as the moderator here, I have a few questions for both Datin Sri as well as Datuk Ma, if I may. Sorry, just bear with me. My iPad locked itself and I can't gain access to my question. Actually, Datin Sri, if I could just start. You kind of spoke a lot on the corporate governance as well as the responsibility and roles. So I couldn't help but kind of connect on and try to see how much social entrepreneurship, led mostly by the youth actually, have kind of started this new trend where you pursue businesses reasonably and sustainably. If I could just gain a bit of your thoughts on this, and Datuk Ma, if you have any lending thoughts, or as well as Shukib, especially with the participation of youth in social entrepreneurship, please, I invite you to have an intervention.
Thank you, Christina. I completely agree that the climate conversation needs to be mainstreamed. And for that, many businesses are stepping up. So CGM and CEO Action Network, which has over 50 members, CEOs are committed to the sustainability transition. We organized a series of roundtable conversations in the beginning of this year. On the 12th of April, it was launched by CASA, because CASA also is supporting this all-of-government, whole-of-society approach. So what we're seeing is that there are many individuals in senior management, in the C-suite, boards of directors, who understand the urgency, who want this conversation to be mainstreamed, who are willing to step up. But what is also happening is that they view this as a competitive advantage, because this is not a pivot that you can do overnight. It requires a lot of internalizing, ideation, innovation. The technologies are not available at scale. So for you to make this transition, which is aligned to Paris, and we're looking at halving the carbon footprint in the next 8 years. Last year, with almost the entire world under lockdown, our carbon footprint only reduced by 6%. So this is the scale of the transformation that is required. And many businesses are looking at this as a competitive edge, because they recognize that in a few years' time, investors won't want to invest in them otherwise if they are not prepared. Allocators of capital will be diverting capital away from them. No one will want to work with them, and no one will want to buy their products. So this is what they're anticipating. It is going to take time to make this transition. They want to move sooner rather than later.
That's excellent. I hope it has inspired some of our audiences here and virtually to kind of re-strategize for next year's plan or whatnot.
Christina, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
I
yes.
believe there is a question from the floor.
Oh, sorry, yes. Do we have a question on the floor? Yes, please, you have the floor.
Hi, my name is Punita from BHEUU. Just a quick, actually I have 3 questions. Would it be very quick ones?
Sure, go ahead.
One is for Cik Farid. Is he around?
I'm going to have to check with the technical team if they can confirm. Lam, would you happen to know if Mr. Farid is still virtually with us? He's not, I'm sorry.
Okay, it's okay. My question was actually for him to share with us what was the commitment made during the COP26.
Oh, sorry. I've just had an intervention and he's actually still online, so you can direct the question to him.
Cik Farid, if you could just share with us the commitment made during the COP26, Glasgow, by Malaysia, and how far has it been aligned with the Paris Protocol?
You finished your question?
Yeah, that's my question for Cik Farid. And 2 more questions,
Sure.
moderator. Sorry, the other one is for Datin Sri or Cik Shakib. What is your opinion about the polluters pay principle in Malaysia? Do you think, how far would it deter industries? And the third question is for Datuk Ma. Datuk Ma, you mentioned about the environment, the word environment in the constitution itself. Do you think there should be any constitutional amendment to add environment as a basic right in the constitution? As you mentioned, only we went as far as the Tan Teck Seng case by Justice Sri Ram. But do you think there could be a possibility to add constitution in the constitution itself the rights, environmental rights? So 3 questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, a request has just come in from the speakers. If you could actually mention and repeat question number 2.
Question number 2, is it? Okay.
Yes.
That's on polluters pay principle. How do we, how do we actually get the polluters to contribute to pay, and whether a particular fund could be set up where these polluters pay into the funds and the funds can then be used for technological advancement or something like that. Do you think something like that would work for Malaysia?
Thank you so much. I think since you have Encik Farid on the line, Encik Farid, would you like to go first to answer her question on COP22? Sorry.
Yes, sure. All right, thank you, Dr. Funita, for your question on the commitment that we made during COP26. Basically, there are a few, the side event or commitment done by Organizer UK and also other parties, basically, like other coalition, the US and whatnot. So on top of all the coalition or some pledge that made by the other parties, we joined 2. One is a Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forest and Land Use. It is under UK presidency. And then the other one is a Global Methane Pledge by USA. Because we know that from our GHG emission that we produce, we emit based on 16th BHEUU report. Methane alone is around 57 million tons. So if we have some plan to reduce the methane, then can contribute more to our pledge if we want to be net zero by at least by 2050 or the other years. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Encik Farid. If I could just kind of, Datuk Mah, it would be all right for you to answer the question first, and then we can proceed with Datin Sri and Shakib.
Yes, I'll answer the third question. Thank you very much, Dr. Punita, for that interesting question. Amendments to the Constitution, as you know, will require 2/3. And given the positions that we are in, I think that may take some time. So rather than wait for that, I think we do have sufficient authority, we do have sufficient provisions within the law. As been mentioned, there are so many laws on environmental law and so on. because of the judicial pronouncements, the cases that are being held and decisions made by the Apex Court, by the Federal Court, these are good judicial precedents, and they will be just as binding as any amendments in the Constitution. Of course, to somebody who picks up the Constitution and you read it as an article, as a clause, it becomes very clear. But I think that should not hold us back from any development of, or rather access to remedy through court decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Datuk Ma. Shakib, would you like to ask, or Datin Sri, would you like to answer the question on the...
So about polluter pays. So I refer in my short talk just now, I referred to the concept of a classic market failure, where the polluter seems to be reaping the profits and society has to bear the cost at large. So there are different mechanisms to address this. You have voluntary carbon schemes and mandatory, for example, the ETS, which I also shared in the European Union and in the UK. I think here, the Ministry of Finance has already started work on this, and Farid has referred to this as well. They're working with World Bank, and Bursa is going to host this. So I think those conversations are well underway. And just like in China, where they've started with 7 cities, only specific polluters, well, the utility companies, so too here, they will have to scope out which are the large emitters that will be required to fall under, for example, a mandatory emissions trading scheme. It's quite complex. I would prefer us to think of what Tan Sri Jamila had referred to, living within planetary boundaries. The amount of chemicals that we release into the environment, the amount of water that we're using in a water-stressed nation, are we causing rapid loss of biodiversity? There's so many other things that we also need to take into account. Carbon is just one small component of this.
Yeah, it's very important indeed. Thank you for that. Shakib, would you like to add?
Well, I think when it comes to climate finance, actually we can introduce a lot of things. We can create the funds out of the fiscal policy, not just created by the governments, but at the same time, the instrument that can be created by the Bursa and others as well. I think one of the best case studies in the US and Europe, where they create a lot of bonds, and I think bonds is quite normal. I would like suggest more on the green futures, where we're not putting the futures as in the future financial instrument futures, not just the futures. And then when it comes to options, I think we can look into that. Maybe that's going to give a win-win situation, both the publics and at the same time the company. I think because company thinking about how to make it profit. When it comes to this, what I see is back in 2018 Singapore Carbon Forum, I see carbon as a new commodity. I know it sounds so capitalistic, but at the same time, government should enforce as well taxation and such. And I think Penang Institute back in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, they're introducing the carbon taxation, where starting with 35 ringgit per kiloton, but I would like suggest to go for 55 ringgit per kiloton within like 5 years. I think we can go into that, and at the same time we can look into others. EFT is one of the things, but we shouldn't look into just one instrument. I think when it comes to monetary policy, fiscal policy, we can look into diversity on the, especially if we go to Brazil. I think Brazil have a lot of fiscal policy that we can introduce in Malaysia.
Thank you so much for Shakib. Those are actually very innovative ideas that I might actually refer back to again once I watch this on YouTube later on. But so Hafiz has just nudged me, my dear co-moderator, on how we actually have a question from one of our online friends. Hafiz, would you care to enlighten us?
Yes, thank you, Tengku Christina. Yep, I received a question from our Zoom participant, from Ms. Lavanya Rama Iyer. The question is not addressed to any speakers, so feel free to answer this question. Thank you for this excellent forum, and thank you for all the speakers for raising very important issues. Will elevating environmental rights as a human rights address the ongoing disconnect we see when it comes to action to address environmental crises like the climate one and also biodiversity loss, which gets less attention, unfortunately, but it's equally important. For example, immediately after COP26, where the US appeared to show itself as progressive, President Biden announced the auction of large oil and gas exploration contract. This with the clear knowledge of the state of the crisis. What can we do about this? To my mind, this is a breach of human rights at a global scale. Thank you.
Very, very strongly worded question. Thank you so much for that, Hafiz. Can I just double check with the organizers as well as the technical team if we actually have Dr. Wernberger still on the line? But okay, so as we wait for them to confirm with us, I would just like to pass this on to any of the speakers present here today. Would anyone like to take on the question?
Well, I think I would like to point one thing. Since COP20, I think I followed this since COP24 with the theories and such. I think when it comes to human rights, we need to include as well in the society climate politics, where youth need to be not just a pinnacle, but at the same time driving the green politics. As I can say, most of my friends back in Europe, they're thriving in a Green Youth Council and such. I think back in Malaysia, actually we don't need the Green Party. Most of my friends in PSM also focusing on this thing. I think we need to have one collaboration where we need to eliminate all those partisanship, and I think we can focus on green politics. And when it comes to international is the most hardest part, US, China and such. I think that one requires a youth political will. So I think it's related to human rights. If let's say most of the politicians understands the climate extinction, climate threats, especially back in the constituency, they will go for the amendment for environmental as the five pillars of constitution. That is my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Shakir.
Thank you. Hi, Lavanya. Thank you so much for asking this question. Let me just give a quick shout out to the WWF Malaysia and BCG team who have spent thousands of hours working on a roadmap for Malaysia to transition to net zero. They've done a terrific job. And I think what I wanted to share is that everybody needs to play their role. Yes, of course, this is a landmark declaration after decades of lobbying and work, and I hope I had explained why this is all happening now. The capital markets are also pulling these risks forward, and what we're seeing is that capital is being allocated towards those companies that seem likely to make the transition, and they're being diverted away from those companies that still don't understand this existential crisis. The network of central bankers have said that the price of carbon needs to be $160 by the end of this decade, which is only 8 years' time. So this is the scale, the enormity of the transition that is needed as informed by science. So there's going to be a plethora of initiatives. This is a critical one, and this will give rise to, for example, in the Philippines, the human rights case, which is predicated because the rules of court in the Philippines allows for anyone to bring a lawsuit to protect the environment. So that human rights litigation was taken by 15 NGOs against the carbon majors because the causality is established. If you're polluting, and you're polluting, let's say, 30% of a global GHG footprint, then you should be liable for 1/3 of the cost of damage or rehabilitation that's required. And in Malaysia, I think Bar Council, Tun Richard Malanjum, had already agreed to try and change the rules of courts rather than changing the constitution. That ended up with the AG's office. But everybody needs to play their role and make sure that this crosses the finish line, as it were. But thank you for the question, Lavanya.
That's actually a perfect segue for me to invite Dr. Umar to respond, actually.
Thank you very much for that question. My response is that I think we should all go back to basics, and that pollution and damage to the environment starts with us, ourselves, and as individuals, as well as the big players, the big boys. Well, single-use plastic, that is definitely a source of pollution. The import of plastic waste, something I mentioned just now, that is another area for concern. But I think the bigger part of it rests with business players, the big corporations. And really, I want to thank BHEUU for spearheading this, because under BHEUU, there's this work in progress now for NAP BHR. That's a National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And SUHAKAM is involved with that in the steering committee. And it is part of our advocacy that we want to make sure that environmental issues are seriously considered as guidelines, or rather to have guidelines for environmental issues in this National Action Plan. Because I think at the end of the day, we can have all the, your single-use, or rather avoid single-use plastics and so on. But if we still have large-scale fossil fuels, that is going to create a lot of pollution, and that will drive the what you call the temperature more than perhaps 1.5 degrees. So I look forward to electric cars, but then at the same time, the big boys must make sure that electric cars are affordable. And you don't tell us that we have this Tesla car or this Nissan car, it's running fully on 100% electricity, but we can't afford it. So really this has to be a serious action by the big players. Because, and then on the other hand, I think Malaysians, or rather anyone, any citizen of the world must be educated and must be aware on what pollution does. And I can just cite you one example, and that is if you go by any and you stop your car near any traffic lights, and what do you see outside your window? Coca-Cola cans, cigarette butts, tissues, and everybody, Malaysians are lovely people. We drive big cars, but we come to a traffic light, we wind our cars down, and we throw rubbish outside, simply because you don't want to dirty your car inside. So this is something, a mindset that we really must change. Thank you.
Thank you, Datuk Ma. I also noticed that we have Dr. Wamberger on the line. Would you like to respond to the question? But sorry, while you set that up, there you go.
Yeah, I think it takes a while until the microphone works. I think that's a really, really important question. Sorry, let me just turn down the volume here because I have echo. I think as one of the previous speakers said, we all have a role to play, right? It's the private sector, civil society, policymakers, also science. And it's important from my perspective to bring these different players together. Also because there is much that is already known, right? We do not need to completely reinvent the wheel. And in order to give a space for the exchange of experiences, knowledge learned, what works, what doesn't work, I think it's really useful to have platforms at regional level. Global level, but also regional level. Regional level because more of the commonality, we can bring out the commonalities across cultures, countries, and people. So I would just like to reinforce that as much as possible, we should also be making use of regional platforms that are on offer. There is the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, for instance. There's the Asia-Pacific Climate Week. There are many processes in place at regional level that I think allow us to facilitate an exchange, facilitate a discussion to make faster progress on these issues. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wamberger. So I realize that Hafiz is taken to the podium, and that's a massive signal for me to wrap this up. And thank you for that, because I do understand it's Friday and we all have our religious obligations to go through soon. But I would just like to say thank you so much, Datuk Mah, Datin Sri Shakib, as well as our friends joining us online and the speakers online. It's quite unfortunate we're quite short on time, because I think we have introduced a very important topic of discussions, and as we can see, it goes multifold in many ways. But I would also like to acknowledge the diverse attendance of individuals here in this hall today, and I hope that over lunch and whatnot, we're able to continue and also share experiences from differing countries, from the Western countries, developing countries, undeveloped countries as well, for us to come together and try to understand things from different perspectives. Because at the end of the day, this is a human right not for a few people from a few countries, but for everyone. And with that, I would like to end the panel discussion, convey my thanks to everyone here today, online, audience as well, and happy Human Rights Day. Over to you, Hafiz.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the most insightful exchanges on human rights in the context of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Panelists and moderators, please excuse the stage for the next session. Datuk Mah, please remain on stage for the next event. In line with the theme of our forum today as part of SUHAKAM's initiative in promoting the right to clean environment, we take this opportunity to release its latest booklet entitled Human Rights and Environment. This booklet is accessible via SUHAKAM's website as well as social media platforms and will be distributed to the public. Some copies are also available at the booth on your right. To launch this initiative under SUHAKAM, I am pleased to invite all SUHAKAM's commissioners to the stage to officiate the booklet. Please, Excellencies. Photographers, please capture this momentous moment. Thank you. Excellencies, please remain on stage. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we give thanks to the European Union who funded SUHAKAM's HUB-HUG initiative. Thus, I am pleased to invite Mr. Timo Guzman, Deputy Head of Delegation of the European Union, to the stage to join SUHAKAM's commissioners to launch the HUB-HUG's website. At the height of COVID-19 in 2020, SUHAKAM held a series of consultations with civil society organizations serving vulnerable communities in Malaysia. The purpose was to gather information and data which would guide a more strategic and structured approach to address various rights-based issues faced by these groups in the country. A recurring issue raised throughout these consultations was the lack of coordination and avenues to exchange and share information. Thus, the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, with funding from the European Union, under a grant entitled Responding to COVID-19 by Meeting the Needs of Vulnerable Groups in Malaysia, has developed an interactive online platform for the mapping of human rights issues across Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, known as HUB-HUG. The promotional video shall be featured shortly, and it will provide you with further information on the primary purposes of this platform, as well as information on how civil society organizations may sign up to it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellencies. Please excuse the stage for the next event. Civil societies organizations will be able to start registering onto the platform in January 2022. A briefing session will be held in January, and interested organizations may reach out to humanright@suhakam.org.my. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for the closing remarks, we will now proceed with a recorded message by the Honorable Datuk Seri Azalina Othman Said, Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on Law and Human Rights, to deliver her remarks.
Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, very good morning to all. Thank you for this opportunity to speak at the Human Rights Day, a day in which the world celebrates the pronouncement of inherent rights accorded to everyone without any discrimination of race, color, religion, sex, language, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. Malaysia's success in being elected as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council is significant as a catalyst for change in upholding and promoting human rights, both within the nation and in playing our part in contributing to the global human rights scene. Within a few weeks of Malaysia sitting on the Council, Resolution 4813 was passed, and its 48th session in October 2021, which appointed a special rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of climate change, highlighting the effective enjoyment of a safe, healthy, clean, and sustainable environment is a salient human right. As a country that prides our richness in natural resources and biodiversity, the impact of climate change, environmental degradation, pollution of air, land and water, and irreversible loss of ecosystem are all too hefty of a cost to bear. As such, a comprehensive cross-sectoral, global and intersectional approach in addressing the topic is ever timelier and more necessary. Globally, we see a significant increase in awareness and recognition of intersections between environmental rights and human rights. From New Zealand's BHEUU River obtaining legal personhood in 2017, recognition of environmental and climate change refugees and asylum seekers by the UN Human Rights Committee in 2020, to the success of COP26 conference held last month in Glasgow. These robust and proactive conversations, undertakings and international cooperation are highly commendable. However, we are still running out of time. Climate change is here and it is detrimental to the human lives. Let us not forget about the 13.7 million annual environmental related deaths, those who lost everything in the devastating wilderness in Australia, California and Southern Europe, or those who are losing their countries in the sinking islands of the Pacific Oceans. Closer to home, the devastation we Malaysians experience from the annual incidents of landslides, flooding and severe haze pollution. Locally, we ought to recognize that environmental degradation adversely affects some much more than the others. Fishermen and farmers who lost their source of incomes, health implications especially towards the elderly, and our very own Orang Asli and Orang Asal, which their way of life are so intertwined with environment, loses their whole livelihood when they lose their environmental rights. As such, we have to act. We have to act too fast. Concrete actions have to be taken by all stakeholders instantaneously in the efforts of taking this issue. Some examples include creative environmental taxation policies, for example, green investment tax allowances and green income tax exemption introduced by Ministry of Environment and Water, and carbon taxing introduced in the 12 Malaysian plans are essential in pricing in environmental costs. After all, it is not just the emitters who pay. Ladies and gentlemen, there is also no lack of environmental laws in the country. We have at least 34 acts related to environmental matters passed in Parliament, supported by various regulation, rules and orders for the purpose of environmental protection. However, the implementation of the law is always the key, and for this, NGOs and civil society plays a crucial role in being the public watchdogs for any breach of laws. Judicial activism and creativity have the potential to encourage more public interest litigation in environmental related cases, expanding environmental remedies under tort laws, categorizing pollution liability as straight liability, or even including environmental rights under Article 13 of Rights to Property, like in the case of Adong bin Kuau and others against Kerajaan Negeri Johor, are all notable efforts to further the agenda of environmental justice. With shared responsibility between government, business sector, civil society, NGOs and international community, mitigation and prevention of environmental degradation is achievable. Together, let's stay true to the pledges that we made for our membership in the Human Rights Council. Let's honor our promises made in all multilateral environmental agreements. Let's keep each other accountable for the 5 years detailed plans in sustainability and transformation laid down in the 12 Malaysia Plan. Let's continue to help Malaysia advance to a matured society that respects and protects the full range of human rights. Lastly, I would like to congratulate SUHAKAM on the launch of the HubHop website. SUHAKAM continues to be at the forefront in promotion and protection of human rights in Malaysia, and we look forward to a more close engagement with SUHAKAM in all aspects possible. Thank you and happy International Human Rights Day to all.
Thank you, YB Datuk Seri. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have almost come to the end of our Human Rights Day commemoration. For the closing address, we will now proceed with a recorded message by the Honourable Datuk Seri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, Parliament and Law, to deliver his closing remarks and to close the forum officially.
Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Osman bin Hashim, Chairman of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, His Excellency Karima El Khoury, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Brunei Darussalam and Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. First of all, I would like to express my utmost gratitude for inviting me to deliver this closing remark at the Human Rights Day celebration for the year 2021. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my appreciation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or in short, MOFA, Legal Affairs Division, Prime Minister's Department, BHEUU, Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, SUHAKAM, and the United Nations country team in Malaysia, UNCT, for organizing the meaningful events. Human Rights Day is celebrated in conjunction with the official adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations General Assembly on the 10th December 1948. The declaration is an important milestone in the history of mankind, as it recognizes all human beings as being born free and equal in dignity and rights, regardless of their race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, and other status. I very much appreciate the theme of today's forum, access to safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right. This theme is proportionate to the current recognition for the first time by the Human Rights Council that having a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a human right. In Resolution 48/13, the Council called the states around the world to work together and with other partners to implement this newly recognized right. This is also in line with Malaysia's realignment of its time frame around the common time frame for the National Determined Contribution, or NDC, during the recent COP26. The issue relating to environment and human rights, or the human right to a safe and healthy environment, are not aligned to us. In fact, almost every day we hear about the cases of environmental violation. The failure to realize the importance of the environment as a human right has raised questions about environmental governance in Malaysia. However, there have been many strong proponents of the protecting and improving the environment globally, nationally and locally. As a result of this initiative, there has been some progress, but it's clear that it's all part of the world. Our environment is under threat, and that many problems are becoming more serious and severe. I strongly believe that the current environmental issue affecting the nation and the world requires contemporary approaches. Such approaches need to focus on governance and accountability of the people toward environment. It is also important that we need to uphold the very principle of human rights in all circumstances, so that no one are left out. Bold and affirmative action are required to transform the economic, social, and environmental policies to respect the right to a healthy environment and protect the people and the nature we live in. I strongly believe that the environmental protection is a social responsibility. Therefore, the effort to address environmental degradation and improve the protection should be as a matter of human responsibility and rights. The National Action Plan for Business and Human Rights has identified environment as an important parameter, recognizing the constant violation in this area and the need to mobilize all actors, both the state and private sector players, to ensure that these violations are addressed as quickly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope the discussion and sharing session by the expert today has been very useful to all of you, and the forum as a whole has been a fruitful one. Having a platform of esteemed panelists and speakers who are able to share their experiences and knowledge is indeed a blessing. Lastly, allow me to extend my sincere appreciation to all panelists, speakers, the organizing committees, and all of you here today for your support in making this event a meaningful one. I humbly call upon each of us, to stay united and continue our effort to uphold human rights and right to safe, clean, healthy, sustainable environment. Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you, YB Datuk Sri. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your online participation and virtual contribution to the discussions and for making Human Rights Day 2021 a success. Please enjoy the video by SUHAKAM. Thank you and see you again in the future. The 6-minute video features works of extraordinary organizations drawing attention to their initiatives in promoting, protecting, and the realization of human rights for all. Attendees are invited to join lunch served at Coffee House, level 9. For those wishing to perform Friday prayers, there is a surau on the 3rd floor of PWTC located across the road. And due to the limitation in space, it is on a first-come, first-served basis. Prayer time today starts at 1 p.m. Have a pleasant afternoon and stay safe always. Thank you.
Safe Rivers was formed in 2011. We are an NGO which is based in Miri, Sarawak, Malaysia. Safe Rivers support and empower the rural communities to protect their land, rivers and watershed through capacity building, networking, research, education and advocacy.
I'm from Longtungan, Ulubaram. We call ourselves Lepok Jamok. We have been settling here for hundreds of years. Farming, hunting, fishing, collecting jungle produce. Unfortunately, the government does not give titles to our land. Even the longhouse that we live in does not have a land title. Nobody really seems to care. We have nowhere to seek help. When the logging companies came and logged the area, pollute the rivers, and cause frequent flooding, destroying our longhouse and the crops that we plant. And in 2018, we managed to get some help from Safe Rivers. They helped us to survey our land, interview the village elders, and complete a land map for us. Safe Rivers, together with other NGOs, is also helping us with data collection on animals and birds so that we can conserve and preserve the habitat for our future generations. The complete map that we have is shown here. Thank you very much.
We'd like to give a big thanks to Safe Rivers. We are invited to collaborate with them to do this donation. They gave us a donation of 100 packs to supply to those in the urban areas and the poor single parents and those who lost jobs. It looks small, but it's very big to them because in this situation, everybody needs food.
Rasai kagati na nerima bantu. Ngurang kami miat belajar ke pansut hari kami impus kumbang PKP tau. Terima kasih ya, ngagai bantu tau.
I am the current president of Persatuan Community Berdikari and a core group member of Penang Stop Human Trafficking Campaign, also known as BSHTC. We came to realize that one of the major contributing factors to migrants becoming victims of human trafficking was the lack of literacy that prevented communities from acquiring wider knowledge and skills to help them make fresh starts and contribute to society. At the same time, a member of the refugee community asked for help to set up a preschool class for young refugee children. These first steps led to the forming of our mission to empower marginalized communities to become more self-reliant and engaged in the development of their community. PKB-PSHTC has been carrying out its mission for nearly 10 years now.
Hello, I am a refugee community worker. I involved with the work such as a youth football team project, language classes, single mothers project, child marriage project, digital literacy project, COVID-19 responses, casework, and emergency responses. Why I am doing all this because all this work are very important and it is empowering the refugee community in Penang. Thank you.
Nama aku Achmat Fakur Razik bin Paiman dan aku sebagai guru sekolah alternatif sekarang ni.
Salam sejahtera, saya Syakila, bekerja dengan BHEUU Comrade sebagai pengurus. BHEUU Comrade melakukan kerja advokasi terutamanya pendidikan iaitu sekolah alternatif terutamanya di Sabah ini.
Aku mengajar dan juga duduk di lapangan untuk mendengar permasalahan-permasalahan yang ada di kampung ataupun komuniti yang sekarang aku tinggal.
Peranan saya sebagai pengurus adalah untuk menguruskan BHEUU Comrade dan juga projek pendidikan sekolah alternatif secara keseluruhan. Di samping itu, peranan saya adalah untuk melakukan jaringan untuk meluaskan lagi advokasi tentang pendidikan anak-anak tanpa negara di Sabah ini.
Dapat bergabung sama orang kampung, macam boleh diterima sekolah di sini.
Dapat berkongsi sama orang sana, pengalaman yang dapat.
Dapat belajar, dapat meningkat. Pertama itu macam tidak pandai lagi. Itu lama-lama diubah-ubah sudah. Sekarang pandai-pandai saja sedikit.